Welcome to the CVS Career Services Health Professional School Interviews webinar. This session will walk you through how to prepare for interviews for a variety of health professional schools, and we'll go over the types of interviews you may encounter, some example questions, and some tips on how to enter virtually, as most interviews are being conducted in this way for this application cycle. So first, I thought we'd start out with a quote from Mayo Clinic Admissions. Academics get your foot in the door, experiences get you the interview, and an interview will get you the acceptance. And we use this quote just to point out how important it is to be able to prepare for your interview in order to make a great impression. A rough timeline of what the application cycle typically looks like for interviewing is described here. It may differ depending on the profession that you're thinking about going into, but for many health professional schools, your cycle will generally, or interview will generally begin sometime in mid-August into September and through, maybe March or April, although for medical school, interviews typically wrap up around November or December. It depends again on the profession. It's also important to remember that to be invited for an interview is a significant achievement. You've impressed the people who've looked over your application, and now you really have the opportunity to showcase other skills, traits, and characteristics. So it's really your time to shine. The University of Minnesota Medical School interviews about 15 to 20% of its applicants. It's also a chance to see if you like the school. So you want to be thinking about the qualities that you are looking for in a school or program, such as the size, the type of curriculum, the teaching format, location, and any other kinds of support services that are offered through the program. So what are schools really looking for? Not all professional schools actually offer interviews, but those that do are looking for evidence of these following skills. So your interpersonal skills, which would include things such as empathy, your self-awareness, your emotional intelligence, meaning the ability to understand your own and other people's emotions and act appropriately, and also your ability to communicate effectively. In terms of problem solving, they're evaluating how you approach decision-making. And in terms of level of maturity, do you possess a high level of ethics and a strong sense of social responsibility? Is your commitment to patient care consistent with the philosophy of the profession? Do you have a passion for and understanding of the demands and realities of a life in the profession and of your emotional, intellectual, and physical ability to meet those challenges? Essentially, they're making sure that you're a good fit for their school. Some might be more research-driven programs, others are more mission-driven. So it's important that you research the school that you're interviewing with to understand what they're really looking for. And ultimately, it's a chance to see if the skills that you mentioned in the interview match your online application. We'll go through some logistics now. So this is just a normal kind of a day for a health professional school interview. This year, of course, we are impacted by restrictions on travel. Like I said earlier, most interviews are happening virtually. But if you are someone who's going to be interviewing next year or within an application cycle a few years from now, this is going to be what the format will typically look like. So it's really individualized by school. Your school should let you know what the interview day will look like, and they'll communicate with that to you in advance. But typically, the interview days are between about 4 and 8 hours, and you'll have a campus tour as part of your session. There may be an information session presented by a financial aid officer. You might be meeting with current students over lunch or in another format. You want to be sure that you know that you're always being evaluated by every person that you encounter during the interview day. So you want to be sure to be polite and respectful to all members of the community that you're visiting. You also will want to know what kind of interview you'll be having. So what will the interviewer know about you? It really depends. And here's a couple different kinds of formats. So some universities conduct what are known as blind interviews, meaning that The interviewers don't know anything about you. They haven't looked at your application at all. They haven't looked at your essay, your test scores, your GPA, nothing. So with a blind interview, you want to be sure to be able to communicate very well the various experiences that you've had. There's also a kind of format called a partial blind or semi-open interview format, which is what the University of Minnesota Medical School will often do. And this is when the interviewer can see your essays, but they don't see your grades or your test scores. And then some schools have an open interview format where the interviewer can choose whether or not they want to look at your application. So before the interview, as far as how to prepare, the interviewers are likely to inquire about your background and your accomplishments. So you want to be certain about what you have written in your application and be certain about what you've written in your personal statement, meaning you need to review what you've sent in with your application. It's a time to be honest as far as your weaknesses or problems on your record and be able to talk about how those challenges may have helped you grow as a person. Don't be afraid to show people who you really are and show your humanity, but also be able to prepare through very intensive research specific to the university or program you're visiting. Look at the website, look at any articles you can get your hands on, and admissions material, if possible. Maybe you can talk in advance with current students at the program to understand some of the high points of the school. Learn about the school's values, their mission, any resources they have. It's important to also be able to show your enthusiasm. So familiarize yourself also with current issues confronting the profession. And I'll go over this in a little while, but just having general knowledge of major happenings is really important. Know what's happening in the world around you, be able to discuss current health issues articulately and intelligently, and also know something about the format of your interview, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Just a note on interview etiquette as well. So this slide is really for in-person interviews that may happen in the next couple of years. For virtual interviews, only part of this is relevant. If you have an in-person interview, you want to arrive around 10 to 15 minutes early so you can calm your nerves and prepare. It's typical to dress up for these interviews, and even for a virtual interview, you'll want to dress, typically in, something very, very formal, or kind of like what I would call business professional, and that usually means a suit for most people. And you have to remember that you'll be interacting with all sorts of people during the day. You want to be confident. You certainly want to practice your answers to interview questions in advance. If you're actually going in person to an interview, it's important to check into the admissions office to be sure that your application is complete and that the admissions office has everything they need to evaluate you. So update your file if necessary. Turn your phone off. And if you're in a virtual interview, you'll want to definitely turn all of your notifications off on your computer that you're using. Have a quiet space where you won't be disturbed. And then just try to relax and be yourself. Okay, so let's get back to that interview format. So the interview format is really going to vary by school. And a couple of different kinds of formats are listed on the slide. So there's a traditional one-on-one interview where you would be meeting with one person, and it may be somewhat conversational. There are also panel interviews where several people may be interviewing you at one time, or you may be a student who's interviewing with several other school applicants. The MMI multiple mini interview is another kind of a format which many people will have to go through depending on your school. The University of Minnesota Medical School does have a multiple mini interview format, and you're able to view it, this style, on the link that's included in this presentation. And other schools will do more of a hybrid interview. So they may have a one-on-one traditional interview along with an MMI. This is the case for the University of Minnesota this year. Okay, so types of interview questions. You want to be able to speak in depth and with enthusiasm about yourself, and also pay attention to your body language. There are some general questions that are typically asked in a one-on-one traditional interview. Some of them are warm-up questions, such as, tell me about yourself and why you're applying to this school. Other questions might get at characteristics of your personality. There are also questions called behavioral questions, questions that get at self-assessment or what you really know about yourself and how you might fit into the school. And then there are profession-based or knowledge of the profession-based questions. The questions that you'll definitely want to prepare for are these here on this slide. So you want to be able to answer the question, why do you want to be a doctor? Why do you want to be a pharmacist? Why do you want to be a dentist? And why do you want to study here? It's recommended that you avoid cliche responses to this. And by a cliche response, I might mean something like, well, I want to be a doctor because I want to help people, or I want to be a dentist because I love science. So very likely that's true for you, but you want to be specific about your own motivations. So be able to, prepare for these kinds of questions and have a solid answer. Some of the more traditional kinds of interview questions that you're likely to have are here on this slide. There are behavioral-based questions that usually sound like, tell me about a time when you demonstrated X, leadership skills or teamwork skills, time management skills, etc. And so you want to be prepared to talk about experiences that you've had and demonstrate how you used a particular skill in a particular instance. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go on. With behavioral interview questions, there's a method that we use to describe how you would respond to this. So again, behavioral questions usually begin with, tell me about a time when, or describe a time when. And we talk about the STAR method when responding to these questions. And the STAR method just indicates the following on this slide. So you would talk about the situation or the task you were involved in. So for example, you could give an example of a situation that resulted in a positive outcome, talk about what the task was, what was the situation you were involved in. A stands for action, so what did you do to complete the task or overcome the challenge? And R stands for the result. What was the outcome? What did you contribute? If you're able to quantify, that's usually a helpful thing to do. With behavioral questions, even though you don't know what the questions will be, you can still prepare by having examples or stories ready before the interview. So on this slide, the containers are labeled with different aspects of you. You may have volunteer experience, you may have jobs, internships, or research. You may be involved in some clubs or sports, and you're certainly a student. Typically, you'll be asked questions about the skills on the right-hand side of the slide. Communication skills, leadership skills, problem solving, decision-making, research experience, how you handle conflict, your interpersonal skills, and time management. So it's helpful then to think about all of the skills that are on the right and ask yourself when you demonstrated using those skills in each of the 4 areas on the left of the screen. So take, for example, communication. When did you communicate effectively as a volunteer? When did you communicate effectively in a job or internship, etc.? So then you'll have several stories ready to go before the interview. So here's an example of a question. Tell me about a time that you demonstrated leadership. So this may be a good time in the webinar for you to pause and jot down some ideas that you have. Another example of a question you may be asked is, tell me about a time you had to complete a project with little or no direction. So again, you might want to pause the presentation here to write down some ideas about what you might say using the STAR method. Successful candidates should do their homework and come with a list of questions to ask the interviewers. If they ask if you have any questions, You want to communicate that you're excited or want to learn more about the program or school. So this is really the time to show that you've done some research and want to learn more. And it's also a time where you can find out if you can see yourself fitting into the program or school. So have specific questions, not something that's generic, and show your interest in knowledge, and do something to help you determine if this is a fit for you. I want to talk a little bit too about the multiple mini interview format, which many schools will use, including the University of Minnesota Medical School. The MMI is an opportunity to demonstrate your interpersonal and intrapersonal characteristics, communication skills, critical thinking, and ethical decision-making. So it's very similar in that way to a traditional school interview. MMIs are not the following. So MMIs are typically not a test of your knowledge of a particular healthcare procedure or policy. So you won't really need to know about specifics, so you don't need to worry about that. It's also not a critique of your acting skills. It's also not a back and forth dialogue or a friendly conversation. And it's not an opportunity to really highlight your experiences necessarily. It's also not a chance to explain unpleasant aspects of your application file. Typically, these kinds of things would be addressed in a traditional one-on-one format. At the University of Minnesota this year, there will be conducting both traditional one-on-one interviews and the MMI, and everything will be conducted virtually through Zoom. With the MMI at the University of Minnesota, you'll have 8 stations, and each station will contain one question or a scenario. You would be able to review the scenario for 2 minutes and then go into a breakout room with an evaluator and describe how you would approach the situation that you just read. You normally have around 7 to 8 minutes to do this, and the rater or the evaluator may ask you some follow-up questions during that 7 to 8 minute period. So you don't necessarily need to speak and answer the question for 7 to 8 minutes. They may ask some follow-up questions. Once you're finished with that station, then you go on to another breakout room, and you have a little bit of transition time, and then again, 2 minutes to read the scenario and respond. The kind of format here that the medical school will be looking at, you might have some discussions, you may have a debate, you may be able to work with the rater on collaboration, and there may be a chance for that the other person will be acting, and you'll have to act out or role play how you would behave in a particular situation. Successful applicants present multiple sides, and I want to show you now a video, or actually a presentation here is linked. I won't be showing this to you, but you can certainly look at this area here, this link here, to see how the University of Minnesota typically structures this day. So here's an example of an MMI question. You are shopping and notice another patron remove an item from the shelf and walk past the sales counter towards the exit. This patron walks in such a determined fashion directly toward the exit that it seems obvious that they intend to leave the store without paying for the item. Discuss this situation with the rater. What would you do? So in this example, you might want to think about what you would do. You can write down some notes for a couple of minutes, and then you enter the breakout room and you answer the question. It's recommended when you're answering the question that you first recap the situation for them. So begin by stating what the problem is or what the scenario is, so that you can be clear that you know what question you're answering. Then it's helpful to go over different ways that you might address this. So think about, I could do option A to address this situation. I also want to acknowledge that there are other options like options B or option C. And then what would you do? What would you do? Would you choose option A that you outlined, option B or option C, and why you would behave in that way? That way you're really demonstrating that you've thought through different kinds of scenarios or different kinds of decisions within this example. You also will very likely be asked a question about topics in healthcare. So before you head into your interview, these are just a couple of resources that you might want to review. So you can look up topics that are currently important. There's also an opportunity for you to practice sample questions at this website on this slide. Be able to practice some timed simulations and be aware that you may be cut off mid-sentence or mid-thought. You'll also want to be sure to role play how you would respond when someone gets upset with you. And the reason for that is normally in an MMI, there'll be a role play scenario where someone may be upset with you, and you have to then demonstrate how you would interact with this person who's upset with you. So develop an outline that will help you read the scenario, take a deep breath, analyze what you know, ask questions if you have them, and how you'll establish rapport with your interviewer by introducing yourself and paying attention to body language, including your facial expressions as you're practicing your interview questions. Your own questions regarding what you might want to be aware of or what you might be asking. You can ask questions based on information on the website, but certainly don't ask questions that have answers that are on the website. You might also, again, question current students about their experiences outside of the interview day or even during the interview. And then consider what's important to you in making your decision about a school to attend and base your questions for the interviewers on this information. A couple of last-minute quick interview tips. Come prepared with STAR stories. So be ready to answer behavioral interview questions in the situation, task, action, and result format. Again, know your application and your personal statement, research the school, have an understanding of what kind of interview format you'll have and actually who you'll be meeting with, and have questions prepared for the interviewers. Secondly, even if it's a virtual interview, dress professionally and send a thank you note when you're done. And typically you would send a thank you note by email to the person who set up the meeting for you. Or if you had a particular great conversation with one of the evaluators and you know that person, or they gave you their contact information, you could send a thank you email directly to them. A note on video or digital interview tips as well. It may go without saying, but be sure to check your technology. Check your audio, check your video, make sure you have a reliable internet connection in a quiet space. Your space should be clean, uncluttered, and well lit from the front. Wear what you would wear to an in-person interview. When you're communicating, it's helpful to look directly at the camera and not at the person on the screen. And of course, you can practice a mock interview with a career coach in CBS Student Services. You can also practice a mock interview with a career coach in the Pre-Health Student Resource Center on campus. And just as a last minute reminder, the CBS career team is here to support you. You can schedule an appointment for any of the following services at the website indicated on the slide. We can help you with pre-health career exploration, mock interview practice, application coaching and questions, your personal statement and resume review, gap year planning, and also finding experiences to boost your application. Thanks for watching.